That's 5 after. Thank you for your patience. Very happy to have a number of folks here for our more Asia-friendly time zone. I'll point out that it's 7 a.m. here in New York City, and this is one of the harder meetings for me to do because I'm going in to get blood work done in a couple hours, just checking my cholesterol, and also finally going to get the COVID-19 serological tests to see if I've had it in the past and have the antibodies. But in any event, I can't drink anything this morning. And so it's a slightly more challenging call without being able to have caffeine while I do it. But I do want to thank all of you for being here, and particularly our friends in Europe and Asia. And I don't have a ton of updates since our call a month ago. We are getting ready to issue the initial white paper, the prologue white paper. But I think the biggest thing going on by far is Taylor and his team's work on CNF conformance, and then the integration that we're now, I think, working much more closely with CNTT and the other work from LF Networking. So I'll hand it off to Taylor. I think the main ask I would have for folks here is that we're just about at the point that we're ready for you to start evaluating this CNF conformance framework and test suite against your own internal CNFs that you might have, that you might be working on. So we would love for vendors to look at theirs, and for operators who are already have just written some and have some functionality to look at that. And really, the whole idea of the CNF conformance is to have it become a real open source project where we have multiple people involved who are making contributions and fixing bugs and such. And so that almost always requires some bootstrapping, which Taylor and folks have been doing a great job on. But we're just about there now on really needing help to prove that the functionality of the code is useful. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Taylor, please.
Thanks, Dan. So there's been a lot of focus on trying to get things in place to make it easy to get started is a lot of the focus, and that's been can be seen by a lot of the steps on in the install guides. If you, well, I'm not sure on the screen, but I'm gonna do that. It's probably a little bit easier. Wrong one. Let's try that again. The installation, trying to make it as straightforward as possible to get going, and it's not showing up at all. So I've posted the link to the install guide, and right now the steps take about 3 steps to get going from the binary releases. We're starting to create snapshots based on the CI that's running for the entire suite. The suite right now has been focused on workload testing for most of the tests, but we have some initial work on using the same framework for testing platform, and we've been working for a while now with the CNTT requirements, and there's a spreadsheet where the mapping is going in for potential test for the conformance on the platform, and there is updates that have been pushed back to RA2 based on that. Now, the current snapshot is of the requirements is an earlier version of the RA2, so they're not if you look, if you're familiar with the spreadsheet, you'll see it's based on earlier commits. But what we're interested in right now is starting to get some feedback on how the test suite gets set up and the initial usage. And this works with, this should be the similar, whether it's workload or platform eventually for the type of testing that we're going to do. So at the moment, the biggest feedback would be, are you able to get up and running using the software and test with some type of example CNF, so the workload, and maybe more specifically a component of that. If you're looking at a larger use case, what we're talking about is, can you take one part, test that with the conformance suite, and get some type of results, at which point we can see any type of adjustments or changes that we want to make from there. So some of the things that we're already working towards is moving as much as possible in the initial setup into the conformance configuration files, which is a YAML for finding the different parts of the test, so that when you get started, there's essentially a couple of commands and you can get going. Going from here, I think some of the items that we're going to look at on platform, which we've been talking to the CNTT RC folks, everyone that's working on that, would be integration with other tests that may be there, output what type of results. So that would go along with feedback on the scoring and feedback on how to load those and potentially use them in some other type of testing. At the moment, the binary releases are AMD 64. We don't have packages for specific OSs. That might be something coming down the line. So these are binary releases. You have steps for also testing with the source. So if there's some other platform that's desired, then that's possible. But if you want the simplest method and you're on an AMD 64, then using those binary releases and the install guide, which I've posted into the meeting notes, is probably the easiest way to go. Has anyone tried following the install guides and tested using the conformance suite at this point?
Not me.
All right. Seeing some messages in chat here. Okay, from Ruben, is there a basic setup to just build and run the suite locally? Yes. So I was trying to bring that. For some reason, my Zoom is not seeing this window, so I can't bring it up. But the install guide itself, there's a set of instructions that are building everything from source. And then the other instructions are using the binary releases, which you could think more as development snapshots at this point. We try to make those based on only on releases that are passing the CI builds, but the steps that are there should work for anyone that wants to test in a local environment. We have right now, the suite is running to test most everything that we've had examples work in kind, including recently Michael Pedersen at Intel, I think maybe on this call, has tested some with Multus inside of kind. So we have a few examples that use Multus, and that looks like we're good to go there. We've also tested on Packet on clusters that are using machines there, and those are provisioned using the CNF testbed toolchain, which has a part of that's using CubeSpray for the cluster, but those are on bare metal machines. So Ruben, I think you should be good to test locally. I'm not sure what your environment is, but the requirements right now for the cluster that would run the workload are pretty straightforward. I think once we get into the platform specific test, the tool chain itself may not deploy locally depending on your requirements, but the platform testing itself should work on any Kubernetes cluster as well. Are there any other questions? All right. We'll be posting maybe a more formal request to get direct feedback on usage to the CNTT and TUG and other mailing lists, and then Slack for getting feedback that can go into either issues or some type of form on specific things. But if you're interested in getting started earlier on trying it out, please go to probably the easiest way is via the GitHub repo, and you'll have a link to the install guide, and either start with the binary version or the source. And then feedback either via GitHub issues or Slack channel, the CNF conformance would be very welcome. All right. I think that's it.
Yeah, Taylor, the other update we might give is for some of our Asian colleagues who weren't on the call 2 weeks ago to tell them about the CNTT meetings. We could ask Gergely to do that, or you might talk about it to some degree.
I think it's Taylor better source of information about in the sense of what is happening in RC2, because I missed the last meetings.
And sure, so.
And then Taylor, sorry, my other comment is I think it would be nice to do a demo next time of the CNFs passing or failing or such.
Okay. That sounds good. We can do that. I had I guess, static version of that during the CNTT virtual conference, but I think we're at a point where we could have at least a demo of running once you have everything installed and set up. I've been able to run through that and the kind cluster makes it pretty easy, but we can do that. So the CNTT virtual conference, that was, or I should say it was more of a LFN conference. There was the OPNFV tracks, the CNTT tracks, ONAP, and several other that were happening during that event. And on the RA or R2 related ones, so there's the RA2, RI2, and RC2. Those are all overlapping with the CNF testbed and CF conformance. There's a lot of back and forth contributions. From the RC2 itself, there's a lot of the efforts are on the initial bootstrapping and trying to cover the hardware provisioning phase. I think on the side of tooling for provisioning Kubernetes itself, there's some good choices out there that are not as, I guess, as big of concern as self-hosted. So most of the bootstrapping for hardware provisioning has either been the CNF testbed, which is targeting packet, and there's a little bit of efforts on how that can extend to provide support for another environment or a self-hosted lab. And then their OPNFV is trying to look at how to provide support via other tooling. I think there's the project might be XC1. Bill, you may be on that, or Gergely.
Yeah,
and then
XCI.
I think beyond that, the idea, XCI, the idea is to break down those different stages so that we can have support for what components do we need at different stages. Once we get up to the actual certification level, then that's where the conformance suite would come in to provide the cloud native testing. So I think that has to do with integration for output, and I don't think there's a full decision there, but it's more of discussions on how can we add support to test different things that are desired. So there's going to be integration testing. I think the last 2 weeks there's been discussions about benchmarking, and Bill or anyone else who may have some more input on that. And Gergely, I know I just mentioned the XC, so if you have that, then feel free to speak up.
Yeah, so XCI is a CI framework done in OPNFV, and the main target of XCI is to be able to pull different components from different open source projects and integrate and test them together. So that's why it's planned to be used in RC2. About the April event, I posted the schedule and the materials link to the chat of the meeting. You can reach, you can check all the sessions, and you can reach the Etherpad and the PowerPoints of each session. And in theory, we should have also the recordings up in the table, but they are not there yet. But LFN guys promised to publish the recordings of the meetings also, so all of the meetings were recorded. About future events, there will be another virtual LFN developer and testing forum, which will cover again CNTT and the RC2 work, which will happen in June. I just don't have the 22nd to 25th of June. And now it's time to propose topics. So I just post the link to the event also to the chat of the meeting. And if you have any topics what you would like to discuss about RC2, for example, you can put it to the list of proposed topics. And other news about CNTT is that the board release now has been cut last Friday, so we have now like a released boldy version of CNTT out. But that's it from my side. I can put links also to the minutes.
I added the upcoming June event, and then there's the past April event.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks.
What's in the Baldy release? Is that?
So board release is basically the result of the last 6 months of evolution of all the documents. So it's like it's the same release for the reference model, all the reference architectures, the reference implementations, and the reference conformance tests. But the main thing I think for us here is that in Baldy we can say that the Array2, the Kubernetes-based reference architecture, has been stabilized and now it's ready to be implemented.
And there was a pretty major re-architecting of RA2, a cleanup and re-architecting, I guess.
Yes,
it's maybe not fully re-architecting, but major cleanup. There's over the last 2 weeks.
Yes, the main target of that activity was to connect all the requirements to the reference model, because in earlier versions of the reference architecture we had some requirements what we just created for reference architecture 2, and now we have like all the requirements are derived from a reference model architecture, and these requirements are traceable even down to like chapter 3, chapter 4 level. Like chapter 3 and chapter 4 are where we discuss the specific components in the reference architecture, and that's the most debated part of the text, of course. So it was basically a requirement traceability improvement what we did in the last part of the Baldy release. That's why we needed to update all the references to the requirements, because the requirements were basically recreated from compared to the previous ones.
All right. Gergely, have you had a chance to look at the requirements spreadsheet, which was it's more of, let's say, conformance, potential conformance test, and CNTT RA2 requirement spreadsheet?
Not yet.
I know, like maybe like 5 weeks ago or something, we had talked about it, but I don't know if you've looked lately in the last couple of weeks.
No, unfortunately.
I would love to get feedback from you and anyone else that can look through that, as well as if you're thinking of current updated requirements on RA2. What we're trying to see with this is what are the gaps that we don't have testing for. So there's a lot of, from the platform side, there's a lot of things that wouldn't immediately get covered based on if you're on Kubernetes and you think it could be there. And so the very first thing is, well, Kubernetes conformance test. And we can map a lot of that. And then beyond that, there's the Kubernetes E to E tests, which go well beyond what conformance does. You have even more coverage. So then we're saying what is not covered. And there's going to be some things on RC2 which could be out of scope for cloud native testing because they're integration. So that's fine. So then what are the parts that we actually expect that we would want to test for and be thinking about? I'd love to get your earlier feedback so that we can start working towards that first set of tests that we want to start providing. RC2 and the conformance itself, I expect to be like an ongoing process where we're adding more and more. But what are some things that we could start getting early on that are going to be important for specifically telecom, of course?
Yes. Is this the same sheet that you shared in the previously in the chat of the meeting?
Yeah, and I'll put them into the slide deck. I mean, into the document as well.
And should we look it from CNF conformance point of view or from CNTT RC2 point of view?
So right now, and I wish I could share my screen, it's just not showing up at all, but
I can share it if that helps. Let me just try. Yeah, so this is the one, right?
Yes. So right now, that sheet is kind of a blend. So it was intended to help the efforts, I guess, in all the work streams on CNTT and with the conformance suite efforts. So the way that you can read it is probably starting at the header there at the top. So you have the first two columns for CNF conformance priority and CNTT priority. What this is saying is from the idea of requirements and maybe what are we going to ensure that we have as we're going for each level. So we may say on the RI and implementation, we may say we're going to make sure and have all must requirements absolutely in the implementation when we start. Now, it's going to take a while, but these would be priority of implementation. So the idea on the CNF conformance priority would be a similar thing, but what is in scope? So you can kind of think of those priorities as in scope for implementation or in certification for the CNTT side, and then is it in scope for implementation on the cloud native? Not whether or not it's important for a telecom. Of course, any of the requirements can be, and if we get to a specific operator or a vendor choice, then it could be more in focus. But this is a general idea so that we know what's going on. So the very, let's see, where you're on the flavors of network interface. So that's a good one. So that the idea here is support for anything from having a network interface that has different bandwidth characteristics, or maybe even a specific interface type. There could be all sorts of things, but the idea from the requirement, which potentially is updated after the change in the RA2, but when this was taken on that commit, the idea was different types that could be offered from the platform side for CNTT. And this was a must requirement. That was the language that was used. From the side of cloud native testing, that capabilities might be nice to have, but it's probably not something that we care as the most important things to test from cloud native perspective. Now, RC2 may say, we really care about it, so we're going to make sure and have tests. So the idea with this is what's in scope and who cares, what's important enough for someone to implement something. So then someone maybe from OpenFE says, we're already doing network interface testing, so we want to go ahead and work on this. Versus on the cloud native side, we may say, well, we're working on the virtual compute testing, and that's going to be something higher priority right now. So it's primarily to decide, help people to decide on priority for implementations and who can collaborate on something. And then the other would be discussions about different topics that may not be as clear. So one of them was virtual networking. So this is something that is marked as a must on both of these, but it's, if you look at some of the other columns, there's notes that come from CNTT to clarify some of these. There's some CNF conformance notes that'll communicate either potential tests that we could do, or what does this mean from a platform implementation for cloud native. Well, some of these are not going to have Kubernetes specific or built-in core pieces. They may have an extension like CNI that supports it. So these are, a lot of these are around discussing those topics from a cloud native perspective or from a CNT perspective, so that we have some type of shared language and can say what's in scope or not.
And can we update it to the body level?
Can you repeat that? I'm not quite clear on what you're asking.
Can we update it to the body level so it contains the latest requirements?
Absolutely, and Tom and I were discussing some of this on how we want to do it. So it probably, what I would say is we would duplicate these tabs on the spreadsheet, and then keep the old one, which are marked with the actual commit, and then update the duplicate to a Baldy release. I believe that there's some items in here that are going to be gone completely based on the efforts within the RA. They may have moved completely out or to other chapters, but we found that we've already made some notes, and they may be a test that we actually want. So we didn't want to lose anything here, but we can definitely update it to Baldy, and I'd appreciate you know, help in doing that from anyone that's working on this. Is there? Go ahead.
Yeah, we can share the load somehow. We can discuss on Slack how to distribute the work.
Sounds
Excuse
good.
me, can you share the link to this sheet? Just want to have a look.
Sure. We've added it to the Google Doc, the tag Google Doc, and I'll paste it into the chat as well.
Ah, okay.
The Zoom chat.
Okay.
This is the sheet what we are talking about.
Yes.
In the meeting notes.
Yes. All right.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Sergey. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
Okay, why don't we hold it there? Thanks everybody for your time today. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks. I guess the last thing I was going to mention is I was looking at switching these meetings from being twice a month to once a month. I don't know if there was any feedback on that. I might have them alternate once on a Europe-friendly time and once on a Asia-friendly time. But I'm not sure we have quite enough volume of material here. I think as we start having people working on the CNFs, we'd like to have do that on GitHub and such. So any objections or pushback on it? If things start speeding up and we feel like once a month's not enough, we could always bring back a more frequent call again.
Yes, I agree.
At what time for the once a month, Dan?
We're going to alternate the 2 times is my thought.
Alternate the 2 times?
So could you go ahead and, is Lucina on, or ask her to make that change for us? Where she could cancel the call in 2 weeks and instead do a call in 1 month, but at the other time.
Yeah, I'll take a note here and we'll get that updated.
Okay.
I think I got to reach out to Taylor Wagner.
Taylor, the other Taylor Wagner can do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everybody for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.